G'day guys, Socket here. Today we're going to continue on with our car audio system design and planning tutorial series and episode 3 where we're going to look at different car audio designs and the cost and build times involved to build them. So let's jump on in and take a look. So in the last episode we looked at the steps involved in building a car audio system and how this series is focused on the design and planning phase. We also looked at the stuff that you're going to need to build a car audio system. This included physical things like, speakers and wiring and materials and sound deadening, and then, all, I guess, the non-physical stuff like time, money, and a place to do the actual build. And we also looked at how your personal circumstances and preferences, whether you like sound quality or whether you like loudness, how much money and time that you had to do the build, all had an influence on the design of the build and how you plan to put that build together. So for example, will you do the build in in one big hit, or will you do it in stages? And once you had a design and a plan and you sort of that pretty well thought out, that led you to go then buy the equipment that you needed to create that build. So in today's episode we're going to have a look at common types of car audio builds, what makes them the same, what makes them different, and the types of money and time that you would need to sort of put these builds together. Now, you might already have an idea of the type of build that you want to produce, and that could be a budget build, it could be a SQ custom, sound quality custom type of car. Maybe it's an OEM build, a stealthy system retaining the car's OEM look and functionality. Maybe it's a daily family car and you've got a lot of passengers and you want everyone to enjoy the music. Maybe it's a sound quality loud or a sound pressure loud, where everything's all about the bass and the volume. These are just some of the types or the common types of car audio builds that you could create, right? And you might even be able to mix and match them, right? You could have a multi-seat tune or a multi-seat setup in an OEM stealthy type of car, right? The choices are kind of endless, and you can mix and match these things. The choice is really yours. But each type of, I guess, stereotype of car, I'm not really sure the right term, but each of these builds is designed for a specific purpose. So a budget build is all about the lowest cost, right? The OEM stealth build is about the look of the car, retaining its stock look, making sure that the all the features of the car, the door chimes and things, are all retained as part of the system, and it's all about OEM and aftermarket system integration, right? And the system is what I would call stealthy. The multi-seat tune is more about the family car where you've got passengers and you want the music to sound good for everybody, not just for the driver, right? So, it will have different speaker layouts and things like that to achieve that goal. And then, of course, there's the custom sound quality type high-end build where it's all about the realism and the clarity of the sound. And then we have our sound quality loud and sound pressure loud builds, which is all about bass and loudness and big volumes, right? So each of these builds is designed around delivering a specific purpose, right? And of course, they're the choice of speakers, the locations that you put them, how you install them, the number of speakers and amps that you have to drive them will all be quite different. And so we're going to talk about these different types of builds today and what makes them special. And if you're thinking about, your OEM is important to you, keeping things stealthy, well, that's fine. Absolutely, that's a design choice. What I hope to cover in this tutorial today is what are the trade-offs, what are the pros and cons of an OEM build, what are the limitations that it applies, in your build design, just so you have that in mind when it comes to designing your own system. And of course, we're going to look at the time and cost involved in doing some of these types of builds. Okay, so the first type of system we're going to look at is the budget build. Now, budget build is all about trying to get the best car audio system and sound you can with the budget that you have. It's focused on being low cost, right, and being budget friendly, right? This type of build is usually built by taking the car's stock car audio system and kind of upgrading it bit by bit, and to get a better sounding system than just stock, right? So often this will be adding a new head unit, or changing the speakers, or adding a subwoofer or something like that. Usually use second-hand or generic or no-name speakers and equipment in these types of builds, to keep the cost low. It's usually a pretty simple build to do, and that therefore it's quick. And it's a good type of build for beginners who are just new to car audio, because it is simple. You're not using super expensive equipment, so it's okay to make a mistake here and there. It's also the type of system which lends itself to being done in stages, right? So you could, for example, add a subwoofer, and then a little bit later maybe add a DSP or something. So it's good for a type of project to be done in stages as money allows. The trade-off with budget builds, however, is that usually it's not the greatest sound quality, certainly better than maybe stock. Doesn't mean that you can't have great sound in budget builds, that's not the case at all. But generally, compared to other types of builds, the sound quality is lower because, the install may not be as solid. The quality of the equipment that you're using, may not have the capabilities of some more expensive stuff, and often you lack a DSP because DSPs are pretty expensive. Even the cheaper ones, are a few $100s. And you're often either running the system in passive, that's with passive crossovers and things like that, or maybe you're using the head unit tone and balance controls, to kind of do your tune. For all of those reasons, you tend to find that the sound quality is lower in budget builds, and of course, there's usually less frills and it's a lower quality finish, because you're, trying to save money on the build. But there's nothing wrong with a budget system. It can sound good, it can be loud, and it can be lots of fun. You just need to be realistic about what you can get for your money. Alright, the next system we're going to look at is the OEM, or what I would call the stealth build. Now, this is a build where the focus is on retaining the car's stock OEM visuals and look, and the functionality of the car operates just as if there was no system in there at all. So the steering wheel controls all work, the phone and navigation stuff all works, the car door chimes and dings all work as as if it was a stock car. You are going to be using, for example, the stock speaker locations. Unlikely to be having speakers sticking out of the pillars, and things like that that you might have in other builds. The OEM, and the reason I call it a stealth build, is your aftermarket stuff is usually hidden away from view, and quite often people won't know there's an aftermarket car audio system in there. So as I said, this is all about focused on retaining the OEM look and functionality. Now, usually with these systems, you end up retaining the OEM head unit because it's usually the core of the car's entertainment or information system, and you end up, for example, upgrading the car speakers or the car amplifiers, or maybe adding a DSP or something like that, depending on your car's make and model. You usually do little or limited customization where you are making modifications. Those things are usually hidden, unintrusive, stuff like that. So, you're not going to put, for example, a big dual ported, sub box in the trunk or something like that. You're probably more likely to choose unintrusive slimline subs instead of big flashy sub boxes, right? And so all of these things make OEM builds quicker and cheaper due to the reduced fabrication that's usually involved. The biggest challenge, however, with a OEM stealth build is getting the stock and aftermarket equipment to work seamlessly as one unit. So often these builds can have what we call integration challenges, right? Sound quality and loudness can also be impacted and can be a challenge because you are restricted to, for example, the speaker locations that you can use, the size of speakers that will fit behind those stock grills, and how the manufacturer, has aimed those particular speakers. And so, for example, loudness might be affected because you are restricted to using things like slimline subs, to try to, retain the stock stealthy, look of the car, right? But new expensive cars are more likely to be OEM builds, because if you spend a lot of money and the car's new and, you want it to, retain the new car look. And so that often will also drive OEM systems to be what I call reversible. So in other words, doing installs and choosing equipment that can be easily removed and taken out of the car because the car's going to be sold one day, right? So you're unlikely to do things like infinite baffle installs where you're cutting the car or things like that, if you're planning to sell the car one day. So for all of these reasons, stealth builds, look clean, OEM works, OEM features work, you seamlessly integrate your aftermarket and your stock audio and electronic systems. They're usually quicker and cheaper to build, but the major problem is you therefore limit the type of equipment, how you install them, how you aim them, the stuff that you're kind of using to meet those OEM visual and functionality type of objectives. And you're often, that will have an impact on the sound quality and loudness that you can deliver in an OEM build. So OEM systems can sound great, they can be loud. You just need to be aware of the constraints that choosing this type of build type will place on your system design. And I'm not saying that all OEM builds are going to be completely stealthy, right? There are hybrids, right, where you have 80% OEM, but you might put some speakers or additional speakers in the rear or something like that if you're aiming to do a multi-seat tune and the stock does not come with rear speakers. You might do some customization, and there might be some visual changes to your vehicle. It's just a question of what you're willing to compromise on and what you're not, what you want to keep as OEM, how much customization you're prepared to do. All of those things need to be considered if you're heading down the OEM stealth build route. Next is the multi-seat build. So, this is the type of car. It might be a family car, lots of seats. You usually have, kids in the back and stuff. But the main focus of this type of build is that you want everybody to be able to enjoy the music, not just the driver. Now, technically, any car can be, a multi-seat build, inverted brackets, just by doing a two-seat tune or something like that. But what makes a multi-seat build unique is that you're going to use additional speakers to create those sound zones all through the car. So that means the installation of center speakers, rear fill speakers, using dual subs instead of single subs so that you get the proper tonal balance across both the left and right sides of the vehicle. And so all of these speakers and things are about creating sound zones for each of the seats that allow everybody to get the same music experience no matter where they're sitting in the car. But having all these extra speakers means extra channels, which means bigger DSPs, more amplifiers. Tuning is also more complicated and requires experience to get that just right. that type of stuff. Normally, so I guess that means that these systems usually cost more and take more time to build because you've got more channels and amps and more tuning time that's required. Often with these types of builds, it's not usually flashy and showy, right? They're usually simple, functional systems. Space is often important because if it's a family car, you'll have shopping and luggage and things. So if you are going to put big subwoofers in, they're going to be built into the car, or without encroaching on space, or they're going to be removable, right? So when you do have lots of luggage or shopping, you can take the subs out quickly, and create more space. They're also the type of system that is what I would call set and forget. You're not usually going to do staged upgrades with multi-seat builds. You kind of build it, it's done, and just go and enjoy it. So kind of in summary, the key here is the focus is all about designing a system where everybody in the car can enjoy the music, and that might be 2 seats, 4 seats, 6 seats, depending on your own vehicle. And you can certainly have a tune for the driver and a tune for everybody else. What makes these types of builds unique is the extra speakers, the way they're aimed, the way you create these sound zones in the car so everybody gets the same experience, and that lies in the selection, install and aiming of the speakers, and also how the whole system is tuned, right? So that's the multi-seat build. Okay, so now we come to the custom sound quality build. Now, let's be honest, this is the type of system that all of us want to build one day, because this car has one purpose and one purpose alone, and that's to deliver the highest sound quality experience possible. These are competition level, reference level cars where the music is amazingly detailed, crystal clear and realistic, where the system disappears, and all you're left with is this holographic music of the band playing up on the dash, almost as if you were at the venue itself. These systems play loud, cleanly, effortlessly. These are all hallmarks of a custom SQ build, right? This is the type of system where the build comes first, and OEM looks and space often comes second. You don't normally have a lot of room for shopping and groceries because the trunk is usually full of amplifiers or a subwoofer or whatever, right? It's all about the sound. These systems are often are complicated, usually with 10 or 12 speakers or more. You're usually using high specification equipment because you want low distortion and high quality playback levels. Sound deadening is super important in these cars because you want to minimize road noise, rattles and creaks and things that rob the system of detail and output. Installation matters a lot because you want the speakers to be absolutely rock solid with no vibration or resonance. Sub enclosures or baffles and things need to be absolutely airtight, because all of these things affect the playback and the sound quality when you're playing at this kind of level. Now, normally you'd be tuning for the absolute best sound experience, and so that means one seat tune, tuned to a specific point in the car, which is the driver's listening position. But because these are complex systems with lots of speakers, it takes longer and it's more difficult to tune, and you're trying to hit a much higher level of detail. So tuning takes a lot longer, and you need a lot of experience to get that absolutely right. So what that means with these types of cars, because they're complex, because you're using higher end equipment, because there's a lot of customization, fabrication, sound treatment, tuning, all of that type of stuff, the cost of these builds and the time involved to build them is much greater than some of the other build types that we've talked about so far. But so I guess the aim of these cars is all about the sound quality. It's all about the sound experience. Everything else sort of is second priority to that. And even though I said that they're more costly and take longer to build, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to spend, an absolute fortune to get good, this type of sound quality result. You can certainly get great SQ sounding cars, without, spending billions of dollars, right? But you need to be realistic. You're not going to get this level of sound quality build from a daily or a budget build. Okay, so now we get to the heavyweights of the car audio builds, and these are the sound quality loud and sound pressure loud builds, right? Now this is where the system is all about the loudness, right? Now daily and SQ builds can play loud, but we're talking next level loudness, right? And with these builds, it's all about volume, bass and volume, which needs power and it needs cone area. Now, I covered this topic in a tutorial called How to Make an SQ System Loud. It goes through the decibel scales and the wattages and amperages and the size of amplifiers that you need to sort of hit these kind of levels. If you're interested in this topic, go check out that tutorial. But every 10 decibels of volume is a doubling in loudness. So if you've got a SQ car that can play, and normally they, those things top out at 100, 105 decibels, something like that. If you are going to, go for an SQL or a sound pressure loud car, that are going to play 110, 115 or beyond, you need 10 times the power to get there, right? So, it gets real tough real fast the louder that you want to play. Now that doesn't mean that these systems need to be expensive. These systems can be cheap. You can just whack in a massive subwoofer in a ported box, and put a 5,000 watt amplifier on it, and just send it. But don't expect great sound quality if you go to kind of do it that way. What makes these loud systems special is you need to step up everything in your car in terms of cone area, which means more subs, more speakers. You need more power, so that's bigger amplifiers, bigger alternators and power supplies, bigger wiring, extra batteries, more power storage. All of these things bring with it heat issues, stuff like that. More vibration, so you need stronger mounting for your speakers, bracing, sound treatment, all of that type of stuff. And if you've got big bass, you're going to need more front end to sort of keep up with it. Otherwise, the whole system will be tonally unbalanced. It'll be just drowned out by bass. So that's why you'll see quite often in big SPL or SQL builds, they'll have six mid bass all built into their front doors or something like that, to give more kick and slap, but to allow the front end to really keep up with all of this bass that you're throwing at it, right? On top of it, all of this, you've got the risk of hearing damage, and all of that type of stuff. And often it's all about the loudness. Often these things sounds you get less sound quality than you would with an SQ system, for example. So, while I'm talking about these types of builds, and we will talk about loudness and how to design that into your system, I'm not going to specifically cover how to build a sound pressure loud car series in this series, because I don't have any experience in building those types of cars. It's a totally different segment of the car audio scene that that I play in. So there are tutorials on the internet, about building SPL cars, and SPL guys, good on them. They do some great stuff, but I'm not going to cover that kind of build specifically in this tutorial series. All right, so as we said earlier, each of these specific systems has been built, with a specific goal in mind, but how do they kind of compare to each other across the board? So if we're looking at something like sound quality, obviously the best sound quality experience is going to come from a car that's built specifically to deliver that, and that would be the custom SQ type of build. But it doesn't mean that OEM or multi-seat or an SQL build can't sound good. They will, but maybe not as good as this the ultimate sound experience that you'll get from a custom SQ build. And also, and I'm generalizing here that if your budget builds are probably not going to sound as good as some other ones, like an OEM or a multi-seat, where you've spent a little bit more money on equipment selection and install quality and all of that type of stuff. Not to say a budget build can't sound good, but realistically, they're going to be in different sound quality tiers, right? Driven by the I guess the quality of the system. Now the next one then is loudness. Now obviously the loudest system that you're going to get will be an SQL or an SPL type of car, because they are built for that loudness. They're built with cone area and power and bracing and all of this stuff, to make them play loud. Now your other systems can play loud, right? SQ and multi-seat, but we're talking about the stepping up, to the next level. So you will get, depending on how you design and your equipment selection stuff, you will get loud systems that will play close to nightclub levels, right, or more. But we're talking way beyond that. Where the louder the better is. For those people that like that stuff, it's this end of this type of build that you'll be looking at. Now SQL is a special category all of its own. It's kind of like a hybrid between these two. You want super loud, but you want it to be super crisp and clear. Now these are special builds that are difficult to do, because you need equipment that not only can deliver low distortion and transparency and stuff like that, but also play at incredibly loud levels. So quite a unique challenge for an SQL type of build. Now the next is about the level of customization, or I guess you could look at it the other way around, the level of retaining OEM or stock. So of course these types of builds are going to be the most custom heavy, extra fabrication, extra customization. I would argue that the SQL SPL builds are even more customized than a custom SQ build. You see pictures of these things with 16 amplifiers and 8 subwoofers built into the doors, and all of that type of stuff. They're certainly at a different level to your custom SQ builds. At the other end of the scale, your OEM, if you're looking for stock look and sleek and clean, it's the OEM that style or stealth build that you're going to kind of aim for. Your budget builds and your daily multi-seat builds and things like that can somewhere in between. It's really a matter of choice. And then there's space, right? If you need your car to be functional and have luggage space, and don't want subwoofers in the footwells because you want your passengers to be comfortable, then you're probably not going to choose a custom SQ or SPL type of build there, because in those cars the system kind of comes first and space is kind of an afterthought. That's not to say that you can't build a custom SQ car with and consider space. If you look at Peter from PS Sound and his Mercedes, it's definitely a custom SQ high level car, but it's got a functional boot, and he's made sure that all the passenger footwells and things are not encroached by sub boxes and and other things. So it certainly can be done. As I said, it's just a matter of choice and planning. But in general, you'll tend to find that functional, practical, space-conscious types of builds are more OEM and multi-seat, than your custom seats. And of course, once again, you can, it's not hard and fast. You can design that type of stuff into your system depending on your own preference for space and functionality. So next is processing and tuning, and this is I guess a bit of a look at the requirement for a digital signal processor and the amount of time and experience that you need to be able to tune these systems. And so at one end of the spectrum you've got the budget system. So they're usually simple systems, maybe a two-way with a sub. You can often get away with just running these systems in passive, maybe using the controls in the head unit. You don't necessarily need a DSP or if you are going to buy a DSP, you can get away with a cheaper DSP with just some of the basic functions. You can don't necessarily need an expensive DSP with all the fancy features. But the opposite is true for custom SQ and SPL, and even the OEM and multi-seat. They all have multiple speakers. You're aiming for a higher quality level. I think that all of these builds need a DSP of some type. The higher you go up in terms of complexity of build, the more important it is to have a DSP with, I guess, some advanced features. And of course, the more speakers and the more complex the system, the longer it's going to take to tune, and the more experience that you need in tuning to be able to get the result that you're aiming for. Finally, there is time and cost, and that kind of makes sense. The budget system is going to be probably the cheapest and quickest build to do. If you're looking at a custom SQ or SQL or SPL system, they're clearly the most complicated with the most amount of fabrication and high-end equipment and stuff like that. So they're clearly going to have higher costs and take a lot longer to build, right? But it's all dependent on your design, your choice of materials, the selection of equipment. There's a lot of things that drive time and cost. You can certainly, have an uber expensive OEM build, right? If you choose, uber expensive speakers and stuff like that. But this is kind of a generalization, right? So this sort of, it's not meant to say one system is better than the other. It's just that systems are designed to meet a particular goal. And that means that, if you're going to build a budget system, it's going to be cost effective, but you're probably not going to get the highest level of sound quality. And if you, build a multi-seat, tune, you can get a multi-seat tune in a OEM system, but it's not going to sound as good as a system that's designed specifically with that goal in mind, where you have specific speaker aiming and specific speaker location, things like that, designed for a true multi-seat experience, right? So just to give you a bit of a guide about how all these different systems kind of stack up to each other. So that's all great. Now let's go and take a look at how long these systems might take to build and what are the typical costs involved. So let's talk about time and money. How much might a daily system cost, and how long might it take to build? What about a sound quality, custom build? What, how much money do I need to spend to just get a basic system? Well, these are really hard questions to answer, mainly because of different prices, availability, and stuff around the globe. How much do-it-yourself that you can do to save dollars, and of course, every system is going to be different depending on what you want to build. But I'll give it a go. But a few disclaimers before we get started. So first of all, I live in Australia, right? It's the home of the Opera House. We have cute wildlife and stuff like that. And so I'm going to be using local examples, right? What I would experience here in Australia, with local prices and local installers and local brands and stuff like that. But if you live in the USA or in India or in Germany or Finland or wherever, then things are going to be completely different, right? You've got different markets and different brands and a different car audio industry charging different labor rates and things, and of course different currencies. So you need to take what I'm talking about and turn it into US dollars, or if you're in India, maybe your car audio guy charges different rates. I guess what I'm trying to say is, socket, you don't need to spend $3,000 to do this. Well, you do in Australia. It may be different in your region, right? So you can just treat these examples as a very, very, very broad guide. Secondly, all of the examples that I provide are just made up, right? If I mention a specific brand or a specific speaker. This is not a personal recommendation or endorsement. They're just presented as examples, okay? So if you're building an SQ system, don't think that you need to use Steg speakers or Helix amplifiers or stuff. Those brands are just used because they're common here in Australia and whatever, and they're just an example. You can use whatever you like in your system. Then finally, the choice and combination of equipment that you could choose for your builds is endless, right? I've just made up some combinations for the purpose of this tutorial. Please don't copy down the list and use it as a basis for your build. Like it's the only way to build a daily system or something. It's totally possible to build a budget system for $5,000, and it's totally possible to build an SQ quality system for $5,000, right? It really depends on the choices that you make, the brands that you choose, how much DIY that you are able to bring to your project, the choices that you make. And you'll see that as we sort of go through the different build examples. So great, that with all of that out of the way, let's go take a look at a few builds. Okay, so let's take a look at 3 different systems. So we're going to look at a super cheap budget system. So what's the minimum amount that I would need to spend to get into a car audio system. At the other end of the spectrum, we're going to look at a competition level full custom SQ build, and then something in the middle, right? Like a daily, solid, good sounding system, that it doesn't have the price tag of a full SQ custom build, right? And we'll start with the super cheap project first. So how little could I spend to get a basic system? And of course, that really depends on what you're going to install, what you want. But, for example, let's say you want a 2-way system with a sub, like so some mid bass and some mids with a subwoofer. So then you're going to need a 4-channel amp because you've got 2 mids and 2 mid bass. That's 4 speakers, so you need a 4-channel amp to run them and power them. And you need a monoblock or a single channel amp to run the subwoofer, and that's because the head unit doesn't have enough power to drive all of these speakers, right? And you're going to build them in or install them in stock locations, so you don't need to build special pods and things. You just need some simple mounting rings or speaker mounting rings. You're going to need some a battery fuse, some RCA cables to connect the head unit to the amplifiers. You're going to need some basic wiring to connect everything up. You're not going to put a DSP in, but you are going to upgrade the head unit so you've got better sounding music, a better source, and you can use that head unit to do some basic tuning, right? It's got some balance control, it's got some tone control, it might even have some basic time alignment or delay or EQ features, so you can get a basic tune out of it without needing, an expensive DSP, right? And of course, you've got a fold-out table and somewhere to work, so you can build this system all by yourself. And to keep costs low, you're going to buy second-hand equipment, right, rather than new. So now that you've got a system designed and you've sort of chosen what you a plan around building your system, you can go out and start buying some stuff, right? Now know what you need to buy, right? And so, you'll pop out and you find, I don't know, on Facebook Marketplace or eBay or wherever you do, you find your secondhand equipment in your neck of the woods. But in this case, I found a good head unit or replacement head unit for $70. A couple of suburbs from me for a little Android unit, right? Fantastic. And I also found some speakers and a sub, which is already in a box, for $50 and $50 for the sub, and $80 for some mids, and a 4-channel amp for $100, and a monoblock amp for $50, and I found a wiring kit with fuses, RCA cables and wiring all in a pack for $20. Yeah, great. So I've already got some MDF out in the shed, so I can make some rings and a basic amp mounting board. So, I'm kind of good to go. So how much is this system just cost me to purchase? Well, I got $70 for the head unit. I got $180 for the speaker and the sub, but I don't need to now spend money on building a box because that already comes with a box. I've got $150 in amps, $30 for the material to make the speaker rings and the amp board. I got $20 for all the wiring and fuses and stuff. So the total is $450, right? Not too bad, that's pretty good for a cheap basic system. Now, I could, of course, go buy somebody else's system. Here's one advertised for $300. You could save even more money if you wanted to, but, because I want to choose the stuff that I want to put in my car, I'm happy to pay a little bit extra. So let's say this whole system's cost me $450 in total. That's pretty cheap. But, what if I want someone to install it for me? What would happen to the cost there? Because this is based on me doing all the work myself. Well, if you're going to supply the equipment, how much someone is going to charge you to install it will depend on how long the time will take, right? And in Australia, a car audio professional charges by the job, factoring in an hourly rate for their time. Yep. So if you're going to get some work done, you need to get some quotes, shop around. Now professional tradespeople are not cheap, and prices vary. But just to keep things simple, I'm going to work on a rate of $100 an hour. And of course that's going to be different depending on where you live. But here in Australia, that's probably not an unreasonable labour rate. Now, the upside is that a car audio professional is probably going to do the work twice as fast as I can. So whenever we calculate the cost of a project for outsourcing it to a professional, we can cut the time in half and multiply that, in my case, for $100 an hour to get the cost of outsourcing the work, right? Now, if the installer is also supplying, goods and materials, well, that needs to be factored into the cost as well. But in these examples, I'm just going to be talking about the cost of labor. So how long would it take to install all of the stuff that we just bought for our budget build? Well, that depends on a few things, like have you done it before? How detailed and precise you are, are you a bit OCD, how many mistakes that you'll make, all that type of stuff, right? But here are my estimates for the job. With a head unit, to remove the old head unit, put the new one in, run, hook up all the wiring looms and things, about 4 hours, but it may be longer if you have to, for example, make a new faceplate to cover the gap in the dashboard or something, right? But 4 hours sounds about right to me. A couple of hours to make up some mounting rings, some basic mounting rings with a router, and put together a basic amp board to mount your amplifiers and stuff on. 4 hours to install the speakers. Another 4 hours to install the amps and set the gains, a couple of hours to run your power and connect it up to your battery and ground and all of that type of stuff, a couple of hours to do a basic tune, blah blah blah, so probably 18 hours in total, right? Which would be roughly 2 days worth of work if you put in 2 9-hour days, right? Now this assumes everything goes to plan, like you turn the system on and nothing happens, or one of the speakers is not working and it takes you an hour or two to track down the fault to a dodgy channel on the amplifier, the usual stuff that comes up. But yep, a couple of days feels about right for a project this size. So getting back to what if I want somebody else to do the install question because I don't have the tools or the space or the experience, well, we can take 18 hours or 2 days as an estimate, right? Now, we know that if the time is 18 hours and a professional, takes about half the time, then, they're going to take roughly 9 hours at $100 an hour. That's $900, right? Which now pushes our total up from 450, to $1,350, right? So yeah, it's quite a jump. So when you have a look at DIY versus outsourcing, you know, if we do it ourselves, 450, we give it to somebody else to do, and they've got to, you know, spend, you know, a day or two doing the work for us, and they're going to charge us $900, then, you know, it's quite a jump. You know, in fact, the labour for your total project is about 67%, or at least 70%, right? And the rest of it, 30% of your budget, is actually on the stuff that you're installing in your car. So the first takeaway is that, you know, outsourcing stuff to professionals is expensive. Probably not telling you something that you don't already know, but the cheapest way to keep the cost of your project down is to be able to do it yourself, right? Yeah. So how little could you get to spend on a basic system? Well, it's cheap, you know, somewhere under $500. It's quick, a couple of days. It will certainly sound better than stock, but you know, it won't sound great. It won't sound, you know, like a SQ competition car. It could be loud, but it won't be super loud like an SQL or an SPL car. It would probably rattle and buzz because there's, you know, haven't done any sound treatment or anything like that. But you can 100% get a basic car audio setup for cheap. It's a great platform for upgrading, and it's also a great project if you're just starting out with fabrication because it's simple. You can make mistakes and you're not sort of dealing with expensive equipment and things. And as I said, you know, it's a great way to learn and build experience before you take on something more advanced. And you can always do stuff in stages, right? You can, you know, install as a start a subwoofer, and then, you know, maybe put in some new speakers down the track, and then, you know, third stage, you know, maybe put in a cheap DSP or something. There's lots of ways to do about it, but the key takeaway is, you know, you don't have to spend uber money to get into car audio. Okay, so next we're going to move on to our daily system. So this is, you know, a solid car audio system that will sound good, but, you know, won't be at sound quality competition level, but, you know, just decent, good sound, pretty solid little system, right, in an everyday car. So what can we expect in terms of cost and build time? Well, once again, it depends on what you want. But for example, you know, you might decide that you want a new head unit with, you know, some extra features. So you're going to replace, you know, the old unit with something a little more modern. You don't want a lot of amplifiers and things. You know, are conscious of space because it's a smaller car. So you're going to use a DSP amp combo to you know, run the speakers and do all that type of thing. You're going to have a three-way system with some rear speakers and a small subwoofer. You know, so tweeters, some mids, mid bass, some rear fill, and you know, a sub in a small box. Because it's a hatch, you know, and you want the sub to be removable if you know, need some extra storage space. You know, so it's going to be in a little down-firing box or something, you know, with a, you know, detachable speaker cable, so you can take it out of the back of the car quickly. And you know, and you're going to install the tweeters and the mids on the A pillars near the windscreen, and you're going to do the mid bass in the door cards and the rear fills in the rear door cards. You know, so pretty simple. Probably the most complicated part of the install is going to be, you know, building the A pillars with the tweeters and mids on the A's. You know, and because the DSP is going to be doing all the amplification for the front end and the rear speakers, and you're going to need an 8-channel DSP because you've got 2 tweeters, 2 mids, 2 mid bass, and 2 rears, which is, you know, 8 speakers. So you need 8 channels plus a channel for the sub, and you're going to need a single channel amplifier or a mono block for the subwoofer. It doesn't need to be too powerful because you're, you know, just looking for a little 10-inch or, you know, something for your sub, nothing crazy. You're going to need some fuses, some RCA cables to connect everything up, some speaker wire, distribution blocks, and all of that type of stuff for the power and wiring. Now you decide to do a little bit of sound treatment, so maybe some butyl stuff for the door panels to stop vibrations, and some cloth tape and foam and stuff around the B pillars and things, and the dash and trim to stop any squeaks and rattles. So not crazy on sound treatment, but a little bit to get rid of some of that noise and vibration. And then you're going to do the tune. Now it's an 8 speaker system, so you're going to need a full tune. That's probably going to take a day to do, and you're going to do all of this work yourself, except the pillars, because the mids and tweets on the pillars is quite a complicated setup, and it's going to be really difficult to wrap. And you don't feel that confident, and you want it to look really good, so you're going to outsource that to someone professional to wrap the pillars for you, right? So there's your design for your system, and so now you know what it is that you want to build. You can go out and start buying the bits for it, right? So once again, I'm going to buy probably second-hand equipment, maybe some new stuff, but probably better quality than just the budget stuff that we had before. So I found a local Android 15 head unit for $200, which will be perfect for me. And I found a Hertz DSP, 8-channel DSP for $800. I found a Focal 3-way component system, which is a really good buy at $450. Right, that's got the 6.5-inch, the mid bass, the mids and tweeters, all in one kit. Some JBL coaxes, which I can use for the rears, and a Kenwood subwoofer, right? Perfect in a ported box. Once again, easy to remove and take out of my hatch, perfect size, and I can get that for $100, right? So happy days. I found a Rockford Fosgate monoblock for $250, which would be perfect to run the sub, and some wiring kits and bits and pieces and fuse boxes and stuff I was able to find as well as some sound deadening material, right, for $80 that someone was selling. So I've got everything to kind of build my system now, right? So $200 for head unit, $800 for the DSP, $615 for all the speakers, including the sub box. I'm going to use ply instead of MDF, more solid mountings for the rings, all the resins and things that I need to build my pillars. I've got my amplifier for $250, all the fuses and wiring stuff are about $130, $80 worth of sound treatment, and it's going to cost me about $300 to get my pillars wrapped right by a professional, right? So that's all looking pretty good. Total $2,615, right? So yeah, fantastic. That's sounds about right. But how much or how long would it take to build a system like this? Well, once again, these are just my estimates. 4 hours to install and hook up the head unit. 4 hours to hook up the DSP, install it, set it all up, all of that type of stuff. 8 hours to mount the speakers, fit the sub box, those types of things. Probably the biggest part of the project is going to be making the A pillars, right? So that's going to take me about 3 days by the time, I cut, aim them, jigsaw it all together, resin, sand, do all that type of stuff, get them into shape to send off to the trimmer. Pillars take a long time to build, so that's why that's 24 hours for the pillars and 4 hours to do the rings. 8 hours to build an amp rack and install the amps and things like that. Couple of days to strip the interior of the car, run all your speaker wires, and all the things to do with setting up your power supply. About a day to sound treat the doors and trims, because you've got to take off the door cards and put them all back, and all that type of stuff. A day to tune. So in total, this project's going to take about 84 hours, about 11 days, if you're sort of doing about 8-hour days to complete, right? And once again, that's assuming no issues. Now, if I take this to a shop, I'm likely to turn this project over in about a week, because they'll do things a lot quicker than me, 40 hours instead of 80. So this kind of feels about right, but if I take it into the shop, once again, he's going to be charging me $100 an hour. We said it's going to take us about 80 hours for us to do. They're going to do it in half the time. So, he's going to be about $4,000 in labor if I take it to a shop to do, and $300 for my pillars. So, the total cost is, for outsourcing, $4,300, right? Which takes my project to a grand total of $6,615. Now, if you just drive your car into a car audio shop here in Australia and you said, hey, I want a pretty solid, decent daily system, that's the type of money that it's in the ballpark of what you'd probably expect to pay for them to supply and install an entire system like this. So, we're kind of in the ballpark with this example. But once again, when you stack up the numbers and you have a look at how things sort of fall out, it's much cheaper, of course, to do it yourself. If you take it into a shop, all the expenses and the labor, and when you kind of think about it, the labor's 2 times what you would be spending on the rest of the system, right? So when you are doing it yourself, you're going to spend about half your budget on equipment and another 25% on speakers and 25% on everything else. When you outsource it, you're going to spend probably 2/3 of the budget, just on outsourced labor. Which are, similar splits to what we saw in this super budget build. All right. So if you're going to do a daily system, it's going to sound good. It's going to be a big improvement over what you've got as a stock system. It can be a pretty affordable system. If you do it yourself, a week to get a system, built professionally, or a couple of weeks, as a project is, pretty reasonable. Most of the stuff that you'll be putting, like the stuff that we talked about, could be easily removed and returned to stock. If you wanted to. You can make these systems pretty space and OEM friendly, but just be aware it won't be SQ competition level. It'll sound good, but it won't be that that competition level sound quality experience, and it won't be 110 decibels loud, right? It won't be in the SPL type of area, but it will be a great sounding daily system. It'll suit most genres of music that you play, and play loud when you want to crank it up, right? But you kind of get what you pay for. Okay, next we're going to move on to our sound quality custom system, and once again we're going to look at what's expected in terms of cost and build times, and as always it depends on what you want from your custom build, but custom builds can get pretty crazy, and I'm just going to work on a typical build, a middle of the road, not uber expensive speaker stuff, just sort of middle of the road, high-end equipment with a typical level of fabrication and sound treatment. But once again, treat this as a guide only. There are lots of different ways that you could build an SQ custom system. As I said, I'm going for something that's middle of the road, not super top end and not super budget, right? So let's for example, what might we have in a typical SQ custom build? Well, first of all, you're more likely to have an independent music source, because the quality of the music source, your sound will never be better than the source of the music that you're playing. So in this case, I'm going to want a digital audio player, so I can play high quality FLAC files. Because at this level, your car audio system will really show up terrible sounding recorded sources. So the better the source, the better the end result that you'll hear in your car audio system, right? Next, I'm going to want a bunch of speakers. I'm going to want some tweeters, high-end 1-inch tweeters, some 4-inch mids, 6.5 mid bass. I want a pair of dual 12-inch subs, a 10-inch sub for the front, and some wide bands to do differential rear fill at the backs. Then to install them, I'm going to put the tweeters on the A-pillars near the windscreen. I'm going to install the mid on the dashboard in the corners of the windscreens. I'm going to put the mid bass in special enclosures in the door cards. I'm going to put my rear subs in a sealed enclosure in the back. The front sub, I'm going to build a special fiberglass custom box in the footwell. So it integrates well into the car and still gives the passenger foot room. And I'm going to put the rear wide bands up on the C-pillars. So I've got 4 sets of pillars to build. I've got a rear sub box to build. I've got a front footwell sub box to build. Special enclosures in the doors and some mounting rings and things to mount the mids up on the dash, right? Then to amplify all of this stuff, I'm going to need 2 monoblock amps or single channel amps, one to run the front sub, one to run the rear sub, and I'm going to need 2 4-channel amplifiers to run. One of those amplifiers will run the tweeters and the mids, the other one will run the mid bass and the rear speakers, right? So in 6 amplifiers in total. Then I'm going to need a DSP to control all of this. Now, because I've got 2 tweeters, 2 mids, 2 mid bass, 2 rear speakers, and 2 subs, I'm going to need a minimum of 10 channels, right? A 10 channel standalone DSP. And I want to have a director or a conductor up front in the car. I think I'm going to go with the director. And I want a Bluetooth card so I can stream from my phone, right? So DSP, controller, and Bluetooth card for processing. What else will I need? I need power and wiring, right? So fuses, RCA cables, optical cables to connect up my digital audio player to the DSP, a bunch of wiring, 0 gauge for the power, 4 gauge for for the amplifiers, speaker wiring, so I can run all my speaker wires, distribution blocks to connect up all the wires. I'm going to do some LED lighting so I can show off some of the amplifiers and amps and things. So some LED lighting strips, some controllers and stuff like that. And all of this stuff, I'm going to also need a second battery because this puts big power demands on the car. Now I'm not into SQL or SPL, so I don't need the big 3 upgrade or anything just yet. I don't want it to be that loud, but I'm going to need a second battery so it takes the strain off the main battery. So I need a 120 amp hour AGM battery for that. What else am I going to want? Sound treatment. So sound treatment is super important when it comes to stopping all the road noise and rattles and buzzes that I guess steal the detail away from my system. So I'm going to need butyl deadener to stop the vibrations, mass loaded vinyl, which will act as a sound blocker, open cell foams that I can put together, put between things that are going to come in contact and stop rattles and resonances, cloth tape to wrap trim pieces and stuff, and I'm going to do the floors, the doors, the trunk area, the wheel arches, and so I'm going to need a bunch of sound treatment material. Then I'm going to have to do a tune because I'm aiming for a very high standard of sound quality. That's going to take me a lot longer to do than a normal tune, and I want 2 presets. Maybe I want a party setting and I want a competition or demonstration setting. Don't know, but I'm going to have to do 2 tunes, so that's probably going to take me day and a half or something to do properly. So I'm allowing 12 hours for to do the tune, and I've done a couple of builds before, and I even though this is a pretty complicated system and it's takes a lot more experience to build, I'm going to do all the build myself, right? So now that this is just an example of a type of SQ custom build that you could do. Of course, there are lots of other ways to do it, but this, as I said, is just an example. But now that I have a plan and I know what I need to go and buy, I can go out and find it, right? So I tend, I'm going to buy new equipment for this build. I could use second-hand equipment, but I'm going to buy it all new. And it starts with my digital process, my DAP player, my new source. So, I found one of these for $260 odd or whatever it is. I bought the Helix, what is it end up being? Helix Pro 10, right? 10 channel DSP, which was $1,075. Controller, it was $550. The Bluetooth card for $295. So the processor cost $1,920, so close to $2,000 just for the DSP stuff. Now the speakers, I've decided that I'm going to go with the Steg SST50 tweeters, the MS-S3 mids, and Micro Precision mid bass. So that's $500, $1,300, and $1,600. So expensive speakers, but certainly there are more expensive speakers out on the market. $15,000, $20,000 speaker sets that you can buy. So these are pretty reasonable price for the quality. Then I'm going to need subwoofers and some widebands. I'm going to go with the Image Dynamic 12-inch pair of those at $652 each. The Hertz Slimline 10 for the front sub, because there's not a lot of room in that footwell, so I need a slim line front sub. That's $650, and some Steg widebands for the rears, because I need the rear speakers for differential rear fill to play a wide frequency band from 300 as high as they can play. So that's $550. Grand total for the speakers and subs, $5,880, nearly $6,000 just on the speakers alone. But as I said, these are not uber speakers. These are, good quality high-end speakers, but middle of the road, I would say. Next is the amplifiers. Now, as I said, we're going to need 6 amplifiers. I'm going to use the Helix C1 monoblock for the rears and the Zapco monoblock for the fronts, and 2 Helix C4s. They're both 4-channel amps to run the tweeters, mids, mid-bass, and rears. Okay, so add up all of those amplifiers, $8,450. So yeah. Then of course I'm going to need fuses, distribution blocks, all of that type of stuff for the wiring. Now I've chosen to go with Stinger brand. I don't need to, but all of that stuff. So the materials for doing the pillars, the sub boxes, the plywood, the resins, all of those types of things, plus the sound treatment materials, all 10 RCA cables, LED lighting, all of that type of stuff, grand total of $2,765, right? So when we sort of lay all that stuff out, and there's some big numbers there, $265 for the source, nearly $2,000 for the DSP, nearly $6,000 for the speakers and the subs, $1,600 for materials, nearly $8,500 for amplifiers, nearly $3,000 on fuses, distribution blocks, wiring, cables, all of that stuff, $800 in sound treatment material, grand total $21,860. $680, right? That's an eye-watering grand total. Now, as I said, this is using decent quality equipment. You could spend 2-3 times this much if you went out with uber expensive brands or single amps on every speakers, but this is middle of the road. There is lots of room to save money and do it with different brands. Do I really need Stinger branded fuse blocks, right? Or RCA cables at $70 each? No, of course not. So there is wriggle room to move. Doesn't mean you need to spend this kind of money to get an SQ custom build. this is middle of the road. You can certainly spend a lot more, and you can certainly spend a lot less. But for a typical system like this, that's the kind of number that you're looking at, and this is all based on doing it yourself. Now, how long would this take to build? Well, once again, just my estimates. 8 hours to set up the DSP, 24 hours to install all the speakers and subs, another few days to set up the amplifiers and everything and set the gains. The big time sink is on the install, building sub boxes, building doing fiberglass work for your front sub, building special door enclosures for your mid bass in your doors, building A pillars and C pillars, a lot of work. So about 180 hours worth of just fabrication for the equipment installs. 80 hours on the sound treatment, right? This is to strip the interior, treat the cabin, the wheels, the wheel arches, put everything back, treat all the trim. It's quite time consuming, so at least 80 hours there. Probably 12 hours to do a tune with a couple of presets. So as I said, these are my best guesses of how long it would take you if you were doing it yourself, and so that is 376 hours, right? 47 days, or if you're working 8 days a week, 8 hours a day, it's about 7 weeks worth of work, and this is not unusual for a big SQ custom build, right? They can usually be hundreds of hours. I've seen builds that 700-800 hours in length, right, or more. So 400 hours to do a custom build sounds about right. So what would happen if we wanted to outsource the work to a shop, if we just wanted to walk in and say, hey, build me an SQ system? Well, as we said, we've got about 400 hours worth of work. So a shop is probably going to do it in about half the time. So let's work on 190 hours. That would be $19,000 worth of labor at $100 an hour, right? And so that would push our total up from $21,000 to $40,000. Okay, so as I said, this would be the kind of cost that, if you just rocked up to, a typical car audio shop and said, build me an audiophile, competition level system, this is the type of money for a middle of the road system, that you can expect to pay, here in Australia. And, people do, and some people spend more, to be honest, right? And, if you're doing that in a shop, rarely do you get a shop that would take a job like this on and just work on it full time. So a build time for a shop, could be weeks or months, depending on how busy the shop is, how much they need the workspace. Often they'll leave a big project like this, at the back of the shop while they do some of the quicker jobs to keep cash flow coming in. But if you're going to go down this path where you're going to go into a shop and get them to build your high-end system, make sure that you get not only a quote and all of that stuff, but an estimate of the build time, and get regular updates on progress, because these types of builds have a habit of really dragging out. So once again, if we compare the splits and the responses, like the budget system or like the daily system, you're going to spend about 25% of your budget on speakers and about half your budget on equipment if you're doing it yourself. If you're going to outsource it, then about half your budget's going to be on outsourced labor, and the other half is going to be on speakers and equipment and and all the other stuff that you kind of need. So what's really interesting is the percentage splits are very similar across all the build types, which means if you're working on a fixed budget, you can kind of put half of your budget aside for the DSP, the amps and stuff like that, 25% of your budget aside for your speakers, and then the remaining 25% of everything else if you're sort of doing the stuff yourself, right? So if you want to build a system for $4,000, and you're prepared to do it yourself, then you can kind of spend $2,000 on amps, DSPs and head units, $1,000 on speakers, and have enough money left over to do everything else right. So pretty interesting. So an SQ custom build, it is by far the best sound experience, the pinnacle of car audio sound quality, where the sound is unique, effortless, clarity, realistic, all of that stuff. You know, when you build a system like this, it's going to be a unique, one-of-a-kind system, right? Nobody else will have the same system as you, and that system will be fully customized and set up for your specific car, right? However, these systems are expensive, as you would expect. They're time consuming because of the amount of fabrication, modification, builds that go into them. And of course, they're challenging and complex to build and get right. And to tune, of course, so they're not all probably not the best project to start on if you are a beginner or just starting off in car audio. Doesn't mean that you can't build a car like this. Certainly, my first build was a car like this, and it took me, close to 2 years. 2 and a bit years to actually finish it. So these builds, if you're doing it yourself, do lend themselves to what I call staged builds rather than doing it all at once, where you build some of the car and just keep adding to the system over time until you finally reach your end goal. It's also the type of system that if you're going to build, often it's good to have a second daily vehicle that you can drive around other than having the car off the road for a couple of months and you having no transport to get around. So that is the SQ Custom. So let's look at how all of these how the final numbers kind of stack up. Now, once again, this has just been a guide. At the end of the day, the key message is that budget, daily and custom builds are all at different levels, and therefore they have different costs and different amount of time and effort required to go into them, but they also have different sound quality outcomes. So you can see the numbers here. DIY is clearly cheaper than outsourcing, but that really depends on your skill level, the amount of tools you've got, space and room and all of those things, as to how much DIY you can bring to a project. But these are kind of like 100% DIY and 100% outsource. So if you can do half of it, your number's probably going to fall somewhere in the middle, right? But as I said, these are just a guide to the times and the costs kind of involved, right? So if you're interested, what I'm going to do next is just flash up the details of each build on the screen so you can screenshot them if you kind of want. So first of all, the super budget build, the daily daily system build, and the SQ custom build. So this shows you a complete breakdown of the costs and the time involved, right? Okay, so no matter what kind of car audio system that you want to build, I hope today's episode has given you some insights into the kinds of systems there are, what makes each of them special, how things like the preference for space, loudness, OEM integration, and your personal preferences and choices all influence the design of your system and the choices that you make about your car's build. In the next episode, we're going to now dive into actually designing your unique build, starting with how the music you'll listen to can influence the speakers that you should choose for your car. So there you go, guys. That brings us to the end of today's tutorial. And if you're planning to build an SQ, a competition level car, or a daily system, I hope that today's episode has given you some ideas about how much the system might cost, how long it will take you to build, and how much you could save if you're doing some of this work yourself. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you've got any questions, please throw them down below. I'll get to them as soon as I possibly can, and I will catch you in the next episode.